As we mentioned, President Trump is addressing the latest Supreme Court ruling. Let's listen in.
Country, I've seen such happiness and spirit. Sometimes you don't see that, but this case is very important. I was elected on a historic mandate, but in recent months we've seen a handful of radical left judges effectively try to overrule the rightful powers of the president to stop the American people from getting the policies that they voted for in record numbers. It was a grave threat to democracy, frankly, and instead of merely ruling on the immediate cases before them, these judges have attempted to dictate the law for the entire nation. In practice, this meant that if any one of the nearly 700 federal judges disagreed with the policy of a duly elected president of the United States, he or she could block that policy from going into effect or at least delay it for many years, tie it up in the court system. This was a colossal abuse of power which never occurred in American history prior to recent decades, and we've been hit with more nationwide injunctions than were issued in the entire 20th century together. Think of it, more than the entire 20th century, me. I'm grateful to the Supreme Court for stepping in and solving this very, very big and complex problem, and they've made it very simple. I want to thank Justice Barrett, who wrote the opinion brilliantly, as well as Chief Justice Roberts, and Justices Alito, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Thomas. Great people. Thanks for this decision, and thanks to this decision, we can now promptly file to proceed with numerous policies that have been wrongly enjoined on a nationwide basis. And some of the cases we're talking about would be ending birthright citizenship, which now comes to the fore. That was meant for the babies of slaves. It wasn't meant for people trying to scam the system and come into the country on a vacation. This was, in fact, it was the same date, the exact same date, the end of the Civil War. It was meant for the babies of slaves, and it's so clean and so obvious. But this lets us go there and finally win that case, because hundreds of thousands of people are pouring into our country under birthright citizenship, and it wasn't meant for that reason. It was meant for the babies.
All right, we're going to come back right here. We're going to discuss this. We got Whitney Traylor standing by right now to help us understand this case a little bit more. Of course, President Trump right there addressing the latest SCOTUS ruling. As you heard, he seemed incredibly grateful for how they ruled, thanking Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who issued her opinion on this.
Yeah, and a couple things that stood out to me. He said the number of injunctions has exceeded the 20th century, or however many he's talking about, the number of injunctions that were imposed. But the reason is because we've never seen this many executive orders with such broad, sweeping attempts to impose laws. And so a number of these injunctions were absolutely necessary because of the executive order. And when he said, this is in response to these far left judges, I fundamentally disagree with that, because every judge who's looked at birthright citizenship has ruled against him. So, and that includes judges appointed by him. So this is sort of a non-issue. And this is really consistent with what I think we're seeing this administration do, which is consolidate power in the executive branch, because there's a lot of discussion about the separation of powers. And what Trump 2.0 has done has really consolidated power through the executive orders, through federal funding, withholding federal funding, and then, of course, some of his appointments. So that was par for the course in terms of what he said.
You were just talking about the 14th Amendment, and you were just kind of running that back, and he was saying this is why it was put in place, and this is really not the same thing. Right.
Now, he made a good point. I agree with him when he said it was for the babies of slaves.
Right.
That's exactly right. That was the Dred Scott decision, but he didn't continue his analysis, which was then the Wong Kim Ark case afterwards, and then the other Supreme Court cases that have confirmed this birthright citizenship. So now that he's going to move forward on this executive order, he will lose on the merits, but there's going to be significant litigation, and there will be some cases that he wins at the lower level, but not, I don't think any appellate court is going to uphold that.
Well, now the country and legal scholars everywhere like yourself are kind of waiting with bated breath to see what the next move is. Of course, after this, we're kind of in unprecedented territory. Nobody knows exactly what that next step will be. But of course, once we learn that, we will bring that to you, Whitney. Thank you for hanging around. We appreciate it.